Moreover, brethren, I declare to you the gospel which I preached to you, which also you received, and in which you stand, by which also you are saved, if you hold fast that word which I preached to you, unless you believed in vain. For I delivered to you first of all that which I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he rose again the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he was seen by Cephas, then by the 12. After that, he was seen by over 500 brethren at once, of whom the greater part remained in the present, but some have fallen asleep. After that, he was seen by James, then by all the apostles. Then, last of all, he was seen by me also, as by one born out of due time. For I am the least of the apostles, who am I not worthy to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God? But by the grace of God I am what I am, and his grace toward me was not in vain. But I labored more abundantly than they all, yet not I, but the grace of God which was with me. Therefore, whether it was I or they, so we preach, as so you believed. Let us pray. Dear Father, thank you so much for this wonderful Lord's Day. Dear Father, thank you so much that we're able to come here this morning and study another portion of thy word. Dear Father, thank you so much for your grace and mercy upon us. Dear Father, thank you for your love towards us. Dear Father, please be with the ones that are not here today, and please be with them and comfort them. And dear Father, thank you so much for the ones that are here. Dear Father, help us to go to our classes, listen attentively, and listen to the word that is proclaimed. And dear Father, hopefully our worship today will be in spirit and in truth. Dear Father, bless, guide us, direct us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Again, we say good morning and welcome this morning to the Bremen Church of Christ. It is time for our Bible study period. Thankful for everyone who is in attendance today. We do have classes for all ages. Certainly invite you to participate in those. And any who are visiting with us this morning, we want you to know that you're our special guest, and we would love to have you back anytime you can be here. We'll dismiss now with the nursery, preschool, kindergarten, and elementary school classes. Middle school, high school, and adult classes.
The coffee on the way home was pretty rough. Worse than on the way, definitely. Good morning. It is good to be here. Been a long weekend, a good weekend, but especially the last 24 hours or so for me have been crazy. But I'm glad to be home. Had a good youth day yesterday in Columbus area of Ohio. Met a man there from Gehenna. And if you know, one of the things, of course, I'll tie this in with my Bible class lesson here, just to make sure it's pertinent. But one of the things we'll learn as we go through this study is that there are high points and low points of every translation of the Bible. I like the King James Version. I've gotten used to it. I've used it since I was a kid. But one of the things I don't like about it is that it takes the word hell, and it puts it for so many different words in the original language, and it missed it. Sheol in the Hebrew is the unseen realm. Many times it's just talking about the grave, but oftentimes the King James Version will translate it hell. But especially in the Greek, Hades or Hades, if you're pronouncing it from the actual Greek, we talk about the Hadean realm, where departed spirits go, and the righteous into paradise, but the wicked into what in the Greek is termed Tartarus or Tartarus, and that's where the rich man lift up his eyes in torment. That's Tartarus. And of course there's the great gulf in between, but after the judgment, the eternal separation, the righteous go into heaven proper, but the wicked into hell. And that's where our English word hell would be accurate in translating the Greek word Gehenna. And so when I laugh and say I met a man from Gehenna, I forgot. This was a classmate of mine, and we went to school together, and I forgot that he was from Gehenna. And I thought, if anybody ever needed to go to preaching school, it's a man from Gehenna. But he gets angry when you make that joke, and I forgot about that too. So some people can't take a joke, And I said, "Oh, I forgot you're from Gehenna," and he said, "It's Gehenna. It's actually with an A, so technically different, but." Ralph was his name, and I didn't even recognize him. Ralph's dropped about 150 pounds since we went to school together. But had a good day, and like I said, I'm glad to be home. I always enjoy getting those opportunities, but always good to come home. We're looking today at ancient versions of the New Testament. And, of course, we're just talking about a translation issue with the King James Version. So we're getting closer and closer to getting to English Bibles. It won't be too long before we'll be talking about canon, which is which books belong in the Bible, and then we'll look at the modern day Bible and how we got to the Bible that we have today. I will tell you this too: we were in a Monday night class at Greens Lake Road. It's very similar to what Georgia School of Preaching does out at Villa Rica's church building, and this was at Greens Lake Road in Chattanooga, and they've had that class going on for years. They still have it going. They teach every Monday night. There are 3 classes, 45 minutes or 50 minutes each, and a 10-minute break in between. And Reed Perry was teaching one time, and it was something to do with, it was personal evangelism. And he just mentioned in there, he says, he was talking about when you go to have a Bible study with somebody, take 2 Bibles. Take 2 of the same Bible, same publication, ISBN number, whatever, all that. Because sometimes you're studying with somebody that, they may not be familiar with the Bible, and you say, let's turn to Ezra, and they're going, where's Ezra? So you could just say, it's page 872 or whatever. Well, anyway, he just says, I like the King James, so I always take that. Well, then somebody raises their hand. They say, well, I use the American Standard, Brother Reed. What do you think about that? And he says, well, that's fine. I like the King James. Somebody says, what about the New King James? It's pretty good, isn't it? And he says, well, I'm not saying one way or the other. I just like the King James. Well, this went on with like 5 different versions. And Brother Perry just kept saying, well, I like the King James Version. And it got to the point where somebody would ask, and he'd just kind of laugh, and he'd say, I like the King James Version. And so these ladies that were in the class, one of them was a preacher's wife from Trenton, Georgia. They came back, I think it was the next week, with these shirts that had embroidered on the breast, I like the King James Version. And they gave them to Reed. Oh, no, I know what it was. They didn't come that next week to class. Reed held a meeting, and several of them showed up at the meeting wearing their T-shirt with embroidered on it, I like the King James Version. And so I got one of those. They gave me one. And so I took it to Bible camp one year at Backwoods, and I had gone there to visit, and there was a lady there that she did airbrush. She brought it, and she was doing that for the kids as kind of a treat, and I'll airbrush your shirts or whatever. And I told her, I said, I want you to airbrush my shirt. And so I came out of there with a shirt. It says on the front, I like the King James Version. And on the back it says, good enough for Paul, good enough for me. And I got a kick out of that. I had so many laughs out of that shirt, and I've lost it somewhere along the way. I love my silly shirts for camp. The kids always get a kick out of that, but I've lost that one somewhere. But we're getting closer and closer to modern day versions and looking at the pros and cons of all of them. But we're looking first at ancient versions. I want us to understand, first of all, what we mean when we say version as opposed to manuscript. Anybody, you may have already picked up on this from the context, but what's the difference? Right. A manuscript is a copy in the original language. We looked at the main 3, and if you don't remember anything from all those manuscripts we talked about, and of course nobody's going to remember all those. I couldn't recite them all back to you, but the main three we want to remember are Sinai, Vatican, and Alexandrian. Those are the big three uncials, the ones that we said were kind of in all caps. They were huge in Bible translation and standardizing the text, but they are all in the original language. So they're manuscripts, whereas a version is a translation. So as Christianity spreads, the gospel is going to need to be proclaimed in different languages. Not everybody knows Greek. Not everybody speaks it fluently, and sometimes people may know it enough to read a little bit, but it's not their native tongue, and so they may struggle with it a little bit. It's kind of like my friend who, he learned English well enough to come over here and go to preaching school, but he learned English from the King James Bible, and so he would use all these funny expressions like "I'm going to smite you," and he told me one time he was going to smite me under the fifth rib. They use that expression in Kings and Chronicles and Samuel sometimes, but he had all these archaic expressions that he would use. I didn't really want him to learn any better because it was just too funny to listen to him talk. But as the church starts expanding through the world, Christians will begin translating Scripture. Now, here's the key, whether skilled or not. And some of them are not. So these aren't all of equal value, obviously. But it just shows, it's one thing that it shows us is the spread of Christianity. Jesus told them that. He says, you go into all the world and preach the gospel. Well, that's what they're doing. Brother Lightfoot makes this statement in his book, remember, something is always lost by way of translation. And this is why sometimes I think we've got to be careful to make sure we are consistent when we criticize any version. We want to look and make sure we're being consistent with that, because there's always something lost by way of translation. And one thing about that is, we mentioned this, this was 2 or 3 lessons ago. For instance, the expression, I'm feeling under the weather today. Now, if you translate that word for word, you have someone saying, I'm feeling under the weather today. But you put that in another language, and what does that mean to somebody? It means nothing. If they don't know what that colloquialism, or however we want to term that expression, if they don't know what that expression means, you've just really confused them. So you may say, I'm not feeling very well today, or I feel like I might be a little bit sick today. Well, you haven't translated it word for word, but you've gotten the sense. Does that make sense? So, remember, something's always lost by way of translation. And one of the criticisms I've heard sometimes, and I've used it before myself, and in studying this subject, I've had to learn that I haven't always been consistent with that. Sometimes I would criticize a modern version and say, and by the way, I'm not necessarily a fan of modern versions. There's some of them I really don't like. I just want to be consistent in what I say about things, and I want to do it in the right way and come about it from the right perspective. But sometimes I've said before myself, well, it's not a word-for-word translation. But no translation really can be and give you the sense of what the Bible's trying to say. Now, you want to strive as much as possible for a word-for-word translation. And one brother told me this, and I will tell you this, and I'm getting ahead of myself here about translations, but you can open up any translation, read the preface, and you'll 9 times out of 10 know all you need to know whether you want to use that Bible very much or not. Because a lot of times in the preface, you'll see where they're saying, well, we're striving for, we're trying to get, beyond word for word or something like that. Some of them say things like that. And then others, you could tell the reverence that they have for the Word, and they say, we're trying to get this down exactly as it was penned by the writers who were inspired by the Holy Spirit, something to that effect. But anyway, remember, something's always lost by way of translation. 3 early translations or versions, those are synonymous terms: Syriac, Coptic, which is Egyptian, and Latin. These go back to sometime in the 2nd century, which will be the 100s. So you see how early translations start of the Bible. And that's the early church doing what Jesus told them. They're going into the world, and they're preaching the gospel. Just like today, if you go over into Russia, assuming, was the church in Ukraine when y'all went there, Reagan? Was there a church there already? Okay. What about Taiwan? I was thinking they had started that work. But, if a missionary goes into a country where there is no church there, and he starts preaching the gospel, these people start saying, well, okay, well, you're telling us we need to obey the gospel. What is the gospel? Well, it's the God-breathed word, and you can read the gospel here in the pages of your New Testament. What New Testament? Oh, it's right here. And, and you can see a person in Russia or China or somewhere, and they open it up and they go, what's this? I can't read this. So now you've got to have a translation. So that begins very early in the history of Christianity. These versions form an independent line of evidence to the text of the New Testament. Now, obviously, something lost always by way of translation. These are translations not in the original language, so they're not on the same tier as a manuscript. But they do have their own, it's kind of, as we say here, an independent line of evidence to the text. And that's what we're looking at this morning. The Syriac version. And I won't spend a whole lot of time on these, so if I get too fast and you have a question, ask me. But I don't want to bog down too much in the versions because they're an independent line of witness. They're important. They're important enough that we need to cover it. But we don't want to just get too caught up in it because I don't think this is one of those that we probably won't remember a whole lot about these. I just mainly want us to remember the Syriac, Coptic, and Latin versions. Syriac, spoken in regions of Syria, Mesopotamia. It's a lot like Aramaic. This would have been one of the earliest versions or translations to have been made because it's so much like Aramaic. You have the Diatessaron. This is the first one. This is the earliest Syriac version. That word is kind of a hodgepodge of Greek and Syriac and Latin, I believe. But anyway, the word Diatessaron basically means through four. It's an ancient harmony of the four Gospels, or kind of putting everything together instead of, you'd have something in Matthew and the parallel in Mark would be put right there with it, and Luke, and so on. This man, Tatian, is the one that put this together, combined them into a single narrative, but you see that goes back to about AD 170, so that's pretty early. But it's condemned in the West almost from the very beginning. You had people wanting to read this rather than the gospel accounts themselves. You say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, we'll see, because he altered the text and the message. He often paraphrased. Sometimes he even rewrote Scripture. In fact, I've got some examples here. There are no copies of the Diatessaron that remain to this day because the early church was so determined to stamp them out because of his changes and some of the things that he had done to that text. They got rid of all of them. The only thing we have of it now is secondary sources, which would be like sources that quote from it. But let me find a couple of examples here. Here's one, Matthew chapter 2. The visit of the wise men is described as taking place in Nazareth, not Bethlehem. Well, Jesus wasn't born in Nazareth. He was born in Bethlehem. The wise men came to visit him in Bethlehem. He just changed it. The account of Christ's baptism contains a strange element because after Jesus is baptized, the Jordan is suddenly illuminated by a strange, mysterious light. Well, you just added that. There's no textual manuscript evidence for that whatsoever. He omits the genealogies of Jesus. Matthew 1 and Luke 3. I guess maybe he thought that wasn't very important. I used to think that when I was a kid. I'd sit down and I'd decide I'm going to read my New Testament. I'd skip all the genealogies and skip right to the birth of Christ. I understand now, having gotten older and studied more, just how important those are. Because there's no person in the world who could dispute Jesus is of the lineage of David. And you remember God told David, I'm going to raise up a king from you who will sit on the throne and he'll rule forever. And of course in Luke's genealogy, it goes all the way back to Adam and shows Jesus. You can't dispute the genealogical evidence. So if any Jews say, oh, you can't be the Messiah, you don't have the pedigree, so to speak. Well, it's right there. And of course up until AD 70, it's right there. They could go to the temple, they can check it. There's no disputing it. So he omits the genealogies of Jesus. Matthew 19, 4-6, he changes. He's got it saying, of course, this is a translation of it. And Jesus answered them thus, have you not read at the beginning? When God made them male and female, he joined them together. And Adam said, because of this bond shall a man leave father and mother and shall remain with his wife, and the two of them shall be joined in one flesh. Well, that's a little bit different than what the Bible actually says there. This fellow Tatian, he founded a sect called the Encratites, which means abstinence or self-controlled. They condemn the use of all meat. They condemn the slaughter of animals. Tatian is quoted as saying that marriage is whoredom and corruption. Of course, none of that goes with the Scriptures. Luke 15, the prodigal son returns home. Tatian in his diatessaron has the father coming and greeting him and kissing him on the mouth. So you see some of the silly, goofy stuff that he does. So sometimes people ask, what is the value of it? Well, we're going to get to that here. His version was distorted, unreliable. He earned his niche basically as a false apostle. That's kind of what he's remembered in church history as. So the value, though, is sometimes people say, well, knowing all that, what is the value of it? Well, it proves that there were 4 gospel accounts early. Some of the modernists or people in the mid-19th century, some of these German scholars that have done so much to try to destroy people's faith in the Word of God, they came along saying, oh, the Gospels were written so much later and trying to late date everything. It seems like these folks want to late date everything. But they came along making these claims. But the diatessaron proves there's no way they could have been written that late, because this goes back to about 170 itself, and they had been around long enough then for somebody to take them and compile them together. So that proves that they were around for a long time. So the diatessaron, and then the next one is the Old Syriac. This was unknown until the 1800s, and it basically has 2 main manuscripts. For a long time, up until the 1800s or somewhere in the 19th century, it was just the Syriac Peshitta, and we'll look at that one in just a moment. But this one came about somewhere in the 19th century. But you got 2 main manuscripts, the Curetonian. This is a version of the Gospels, and it dates back to about the 5th century. Got it from a monastery in the desert west of Cairo. Interesting thing about the Old Syriac, the Curetonian Old Syriac, is that it has the long ending of the book of Mark, Mark 16, 9 through 20. Then you have the Sinaitic Syriac. This is a palimpsest. Somebody tell us what a palimpsest is. It's a document that's been reused, basically, we would say. I compare it to, have you ever, I do this sometimes when I was in school. I never had blank paper. I don't know if that's just me being unprepared or what, but I never had blank paper. And a lot of times when I was in grade school age, we had to write with pencil. They didn't want you writing with a pen because you messed up everything and you were constantly having to correct it, I guess. But I found a piece of paper one day and I'd written all over it in my pencil, and I'd done all this work. Well, I was in need of something to do some homework on or something. So what am I going to do? Well, I just start taking my eraser. I wore through a whole eraser on that number 2 pencil. But I erased everything on that page, and then I did my homework. Well, when I finished, it was like, what is what here? You know, you couldn't tell. And that's kind of the way a palimpsest is. You look at it and you just go, I don't understand how. We saw a picture of that last week or the week before. I don't know how those scholars picked that text out and translate it. But it was actually these ladies, these 2 ladies that were, as Brother Lightfoot describes them, I'm trying to remember the word he used, words, wealthy, eccentric, and intellectual. Agnes Smith Lewis and Margaret Dunlop Gibson. This was 1892. They went to St. Catherine's Monastery. They were going to be like Tischendorf and discover great things at the foot of Mount Sinai. And they actually did discover something here and find this Sinaitic Syriac. It's the earliest known copy of the Old Syriac. It goes back to 4th or 5th century. It's a mixed textual character, a lot of Alexandrian, but more Western. And remember, sometimes the Western is known for kind of taking liberties and such as that. But it's ironic because here the Sinaitic doesn't contain the long ending of Mark 16. So, you know, again, people, that debate rages on. And we'll talk more about that when we get there. The more I study it, the more I believe it does belong. But again, even if somebody were to come up with evidence that proved that it didn't, the things that are taught therein are taught elsewhere in the New Testament. But I believe that it is, Phil Sanders has taught this course many years at the Nashville School of Preaching before he went out to search and started doing that full time. And I asked Brother Phil about it when he was here, and I said, what's your take on that? And he says, I believe it's genuine. A discussion actually came up on a Facebook group I'm a member of recently. One guy's doing his PhD. What do you call it when you do a PhD? Is it dissertation? He's getting ready to defend his dissertation to get his PhD, and he did it on the long ending of Mark. And I'm trying to get my hands on a copy of that. Dissertations are not the most interesting reading, generally speaking. So I'm kind of wondering if I know what I'm asking for when I ask for a copy of that. But I just would like to study it a little bit further. That's one thing I will say again about this book by Brother Lightfoot. This man he passed away not too long ago. He knew his stuff. He could stand up here, no notes, no nothing, and give you dates, names, details. But he does it in an interesting way. I think, Miss Jamie, you said you've been reading this some, right? And she had commented to me, she said, he really is easy to read. And I'm not an intellectual type person. I'm not a dummy. But I'm not a person that likes to sit down and read the real technical type stuff. It's hard for me to read that. I'm a slow reader for one thing. But Brother Lightfoot's book is just so easy to go through. All right, so that's the old Syriac. And then you've got the Syriac Peshitta. This was the only one that was known for a while. It dates from about the 5th century. That name means simple. It's the standard Syriac version. And it's kind of gone to the background now because they've discovered the old Syriac. More than 350 copies available of that. It's Byzantine in the text type. Remember, Byzantine is later, so it's of less value, and that's why I say it's kind of gone to the background in the shadow of the old Syriac. All right, let's talk about the Coptic versions. Coptic is an ancient Egyptian language. It was eventually written in Greek characters. It's kind of the latest phase of development from of the Egyptian language. The Egyptian written in an alphabet that's based on the Greek. There are a lot of dialects of Coptic. They all have a New Testament translation in each one of those dialects. But the main two are Sahidic and Bohairic. Sahidic is the dialect of Upper Egypt, which is southern Egypt. Why do we say that? Why is Upper Egypt the south? Brother Allen's not here to ruin this for me. Finally got a moment. I had to look it up too. Because what's the main thing in Egypt? The Nile River. Now do you got it? The Nile River runs backwards. And if I'm not mistaken, it's the only river in the world that runs south to north. And so when you talk about Upper Egypt, you're actually talking about the southern part on the globe, because that's where the river begins flowing. The main city there is Thebes, and the Sahidic is only known from fragments until about the 20th century. Many of these documents date to 3rd or 4th century. They came to light. Dozens of these, so we have several of those. Then you've got the Bohairic. This is the dialect of Lower or Northern Egypt. This is the Alexandria region and also the delta of the Nile. 4th and 5th centuries, there are literally hundreds of these. What is the value of these versions? And that's the long and short of it. They preserve an ancient form of the text of the same type as Vatican and Sinai. So apparently they were copied from originals or translated from originals that would have been that same text type. So that's a valuable witness to that text and using it and translating English versions today. Christianity would have gone into Egypt very early, and thankfully the conditions in Egypt, climatic conditions, are favorable to preserving these documents. All right, Latin versions. The first English translation of the Bible, John Wycliffe, or Wycliffe, I'm not sure, 1382. That came from the Latin, so these versions are of a little bit more importance to us. Approximately 8,000 Latin manuscripts are known and about 6,000 Greek. So you see how prevalent the Latin versions are. The Old Latin came first. I thought I had something else I wanted to say about that. Maybe not. Old Latin came first. This is the earliest, the earliest evidence of it is from a writer. That's what I was going to mention. This Christian in the Latin community of Cilium. It's in North Africa. There was persecution of Christians in 180, AD 180, and this fellow named Spiritus, who was a Christian, he was asked what he was carrying in this chest that he had. And he answered that it contained, quote, books and letters of Paul, a just man, end quote. And so people say, well, if he had the letters of Paul, it's almost certain that whether he had it or not, there were in existence a Latin translation. There was in existence a Latin translation of the gospel accounts. There are a lot of variant readings in the Old Latin, probably because so many people independently translated it. People over here, people over there, and there's not like a committee or people getting together to standardize the text or anything like that. So you've got a lot of variation in the text. There was an early need in the Roman Empire for the Bible in Latin, possibly as early as AD 160, because again, the Christians are doing what Jesus told them to. They're going and taking the gospel to the world. Then you come to the Vulgate. This is the one we know so well today. This is around 4th to 5th century AD. It took some time to translate that. Vulgatus means commonly accepted. Now, remember, it wasn't the Vulgate in Jerome's time. Jerome is the translator, of course. He didn't become that until later on. In fact, it's actually officially the Council of Trent, I think, was the Catholic council that they had and decided to officially recognize it. 1546 was the official date of recognition as this is going to be the Vulgate. In fact, it was very, very badly received at first by some folks. Some folks didn't want anything to do with it. But during Jerome's time, the Vulgate would have been the Old Latin. So just bear that in mind. Jerome was an interesting fellow. He grew up. At age 12, he was sent to Rome to study Latin and Greek, especially Latin classics. He was basically, his parents were putting him on a career path of a lawyer or a politician. But then, as a young adult, he became an ascetic. He had a dream one time of standing before the judgment seat of God. And he was asked, "Are you a Christian?" And he said, "I am a Christian." And the voice said back to him, "You lie, you're a Ciceronian." Cicero was one of the Latin classics. He says, "You're a Ciceronian, not a Christian." Well, this was a dream that he had, but it really hit him hard. And so basically with that, he devoted his life, the rest of his life, to a study of the Scriptures. And so he begins in 382, 383. He's asked by Bishop Damasus of Rome to bring together the old Latin translations into one standardized version. Remember all the variants in the old Latin? They want to get rid of all those variants, and let's get the text right and have one standardized version. And so that was what this bishop asked him to do. This became the Bible of Western Europe for over 1,000 years. So that's the importance of the Vulgate. And I already mentioned that. It became known as the Vulgate when the Council of Trent recognized it. But remember this, the Vulgate is a revision. It's not technically a translation from the original text. Thankfully, Jerome did consult the Greek manuscripts. In fact, it was, I found something here that says it seems like, at least for the gospel accounts, he relied on a text similar to that of the Vatican and Sinaitic manuscripts. So that's, but just bear that in mind. It's a revision. It's not a translation. He's taking what's already in Latin and he's trying to standardize it. He made a quote. I won't read that. It's a long quote, but I will read this. To his initial detractors, Jerome said that none of the Lord's words were, quote, in need of correction, end quote, or were less than divinely inspired, but that he attempted to bring the Latin translation into agreement with the original Greek. He sarcastically said, and I have to agree with his statement here because what he's trying to do is to get things right according to the text. And I appreciate what his heart's desire was. But he says sarcastically, if they dislike water drawn from the clear spring, let them drink of the muddy streamlet. A lot of people were criticizing him for what he had done, and he was just saying, look, I'm trying to get it right. If you don't like clean water, you're free to go drink from the nasty lake over here where the cows wash and, wallow. And that's kind of the way we'd say it back on the farm. But I appreciate what the man was trying to do. There are some problems with it, obviously, but he's trying to do something that is a good thing. There are now more than 10,000 copies of the Vulgate. Next to the Septuagint, it is the most important translation ever made. Anything else on the Latin there? There's an illuminated Vulgate, page from a Vulgate. By the way, when we say illuminated, I don't know if I covered this or not, but illuminated is a term that's used for this when you have the color, because it kind of illuminates the page from instead of black and white, you've got some color to it. But again, you can see here these lines. They would make these lines, and you see how, just straight up and down the margin is. It's amazing to me that people sat and did that by hand. They didn't have fountain pens. They didn't have Photoshop or CAD software. Just by hand. Let's talk just very, very quickly here about, in fact, I show we got about 5 minutes. maybe a little bit more than 5 minutes. Let's look at special manuscripts. I've got them listed as manuscripts. I think they would probably fall more in line with being a version because they're Latin. But these are what we might call deluxe editions. I think I mentioned these last week in closing. They're inscribed with silver or gold ink on vellum that has been dyed purple. Of course, purple representing royalty, and that, again, showing their reverence for the Scriptures. But they would use this silver or gold ink. These manuscripts are just amazing. In fact, I'll show you some pictures in a moment. Codex Amiatinus, late 7th century codex. It's the oldest existing copy of the Vulgate. So that makes it important in itself. But it's also just beautifully designed. But look at this. That thing weighs 75 pounds, 1,040 leaves within it. How would you like to carry that to Bible class with you on Sunday? I can't imagine. I mean, that is a big, big book. And I believe I just went blank. I was looking at this last night, and I don't have time to find it in the book. But one of these manuscripts, one of these versions that we're looking at, these deluxe editions, one of them, and I can't remember which one right now, but one of them is in 4 volumes, and the museum where it's held today, they rotate it every day. 2 volumes will be out on display, and then tomorrow it'll be 2 different volumes out on display, and then the next day the first 2, and they rotate around like that. And so you have to go 2 different days if you want to see the whole thing. But the Lindisfarne Gospels go from the late 7th century. Most of these names just come from where they were housed or where they were copied, something like that. So the names really aren't that significant except for where they originated. This is an excellent copy of the Gospels from the Vulgate. It's beautifully illustrated. In fact, as amazing as Amiatinus is, it's surpassed only by the Lindisfarne Gospels. But that's only a copy of the Gospel accounts here, the Lindisfarne Gospels. About 250 years later, somebody went in between and put an Anglo-Saxon translation. And it's interesting because, it's right word for word with the text, putting the Anglo-Saxon translation. So that's one of the things that makes this so significant. This is the oldest existing version of the Gospel accounts in English. And we have that preserved today. In fact, again, I can't remember which one, but these are all on display. It just depends on where they are. I just don't have time to look it up right now. The Book of Kells surpasses them all. There are 2 pages, not in the book, but there are 2 pages in the entire Book of Kells that are not illustrated. That's it. And that shows you how much time somebody spent on the Book of Kells. It's the most dazzling of all the ancient copies. It's taken from Jerome's Vulgate. Virtually every page decorated or illustrated. Here's one from Codex Amiatinus, the prophet Ezra. These were, by the way, textual helps. Illiteracy was very, very common during this time. And so you get somebody that can't read or can't read very well at all, pictures help. They can follow kind of what's going on with the text, at least to some extent, by looking at the pictures. And the Book of Kells obviously had that in mind because, as I said, there are only 2 pages that aren't illustrated. So here you have the prophet Ezra, and there's a look at the text itself. Here's a portrait of Luke in the Lindisfarne Gospels. They would have this portrait before of course, these are just the Gospel accounts. Before each Gospel began, you would have a portrait, and there you've got that. Then you would have a carpet page, which would be some kind of, it looked kind of like one of these big rugs that you go down on the floor. What do we call them? I don't know. But a lot of times people put them under the table, but they're these fancy-looking design rugs. It looks kind of like that. You'll see one in a minute. But that's a portrait page of the Gospel of Luke. Of course, they have these symbols of each evangelist, and there's unique. They're taken from the 4 beasts in Ezekiel and Revelation. No scriptural basis for this. This is just somebody deciding that Luke's symbol is going to be a calf or an ox. I don't know what that's supposed to be, really. But anyway, you just see the detail that goes into it. There's a carpet page. But, it kind of looks like these rugs that sometimes you see. And I still can't. Huh? Oriental rugs. Thank you. Great day. But it looks kind of like, and I guess that's why somebody came up with the term carpet page. But they'd always have the portrait, the carpet page, and then there's how the gospel would begin. And there's Luke. Q is the first word, first letter of the book of Luke in Latin. But, you can get some idea from that, but you still can't really fully appreciate it. In fact, there you go. This is the one I believe that somebody said they actually, and I don't know who took the time to count this, but they said there are over 10,000 dots on this page. Somebody went and made designs just with the dots. Somebody's getting paid a lot of money to count dots on that page. But you see them here. And there are words that actually are formed by the spaces that are left from not having any dots. But see the design here? You could just sit here and look at this for a long time and continue to pick out designs. I mean, look at that. That's designed by hand. It's just amazing. But that's the start of Luke's gospel account. Here's one from the book of Kells, a virgin with child. This will be used to illustrate the birth of Jesus. So again, if you can't read, you're at least getting some kind of an idea here. And a lot of people maybe could pick out a few words. Maybe there were words they couldn't understand or couldn't read. There's a symbol of John in the book of Kells. John's symbol apparently is a very deathly looking bird. I think that's supposed to be an eagle, but it's kind of scary looking. But that's John's symbol in the book of Kells. But again, you see there's a lot of detail there, a lot of effort went into that. And there's the four symbols of the four evangelists from the book of Kells. See here you've got that ox-type creature. That's the symbol of man. Not sure what that is. Not sure what that is. That's probably the eagle. Can anybody tell what that is? These things are hundreds of years old, and I'm going by a picture at that. So, but anyway, I'm trying to remember what that fourth beast is in Ezekiel. You remember it, Brandon? I can't get it. There's you've got the four-legged, the man, the eagle, a leopard or a lion. Leopard, maybe that's what it's supposed to be. That's a pretty sad leopard, but you can see all the detail that goes into these. And there's the portrait of John from the book of Kells. Here's John 1 from the book of Kells. You see in principio erat verbum. I don't know Latin, so don't get after me if I butcher the translation there or the pronunciation. But again, these are just pictures to give you an idea of how detailed it was. That's the reverence they had for the Word of God. And these things help preserve it for us so that we can see how they copied it, how these translations came about. And they stand in the line of getting us closer from the original Greek text to what we have today. And knowing that what we have today is the Word of God, faithfully translated. Thank you all again, and we'll be dismissed for a break before worship.